In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to install your electronics in the Tinkorelli Kronos XTR 2022 edition. This was a very simple little install. It looks absolutely fantastic and I can't wait to show you how it all goes together very easy. Now very quickly before we get going, I just wanted to show you everything that's going to go into this car and what I'm going to be using to complete this build. So I've got my Futaba 4PM here, I've got a receiver to go with that, I've got my motor in ESC. Now I actually took this out of my Pro MT 4x4, which is probably overkill for that motor, for that truck, to be honest. This is the Max 8 motor with the XR8 Plus ESC. Last year I used the Max 8 combo in the XTR and it worked beautifully, so I figured, hey, why not put this one in here as well. The servo is also from the Pro MT 4x4. This is a bit of overkill. I think it's well over 30 kilos, working at 7.4 volts. It's a Savox 1270 TG. I think this would be much better suited in this truck. And we also have the little baggie that came with the truck, which has all the little screws and a pinion and some spare body clips and so forth. So hopefully I've got everything in here that I need to sort of mount all of this up and complete the build. Then of course we have a battery so we can do some testing and so forth. And over here we have the toolkit that's going to help us put everything together. So this is Tinkorelli's new toolkit. They recently released this and you may have seen some videos pop up from other YouTubers and so forth talking about this particular kit. I've decided to go a different route with this. I'm not going to do an independent video on it and do a solid review or anything like that. I'm actually going to use the toolkit during this install and just give you some basic feedback at the end of the video regarding this guy, which I think should be more than enough for most people out there to decide whether or not this is actually going to be any good. So a big shout out for to Tinkorelli for sending these out, both the toolkit and the truck. Really appreciate it. So let's get to work because I cannot wait to get this thing set up and ready to go. So the first thing we're actually going to be doing is binding the receiver to the radio, calibrating the ESC and just making sure that all the electronics are actually working correctly before we install them into the car. That way I know that they were working out here, and if I install them and something isn't working right, well obviously I've stuffed something up. Essentially that's what this is going to be. So first things first, we're going to turn our radio on, and I've got Kraton 8S selected there, so I'm going to scroll across, select a new model. Chaos Reaper, there we go, blank model. So I'm going to click on number 16 here. I'm going to back out of this. I'm going to go to my receiver, make sure that I've got the right type of receiver selected for this, which is a TFH-SS, which is correct. So I'll put that to the side for the moment. So it's 1 to turn, 2 to burn. So the servo goes into channel 1. Make sure that goes in all the way, and my ESC goes into channel 2. If you don't have a servo at the moment, it doesn't really matter because we just need the receiver to power up with the speed controller. If you don't have a speed controller, you can use a little battery that obviously isn't too powerful, that you can plug into the receiver and just get power to that, and it should allow you to bind to the radio. So I'm going to plug my 4S battery into the ESC, and we're not going to be doing any calibrations or anything like that. I'm simply going to be just turning this on, and I'm going to put my receiver into bind mode. So we'll click on that, and now it's blinking. So hopefully, I think I need to hold it. I can't remember how this actually works. I may need to hold it. So I'm going to scroll down to execute. I'm going to hold that down, and I think that's it. Yep, there we go, we've got a solid green light. Do we have steering? Yes, we have steering. So now it's time to test if we have throttle. It actually works. Reverse works as well, which is good. So it's all working legit. But we still need to calibrate because things aren't exactly 100%. So I'm going to back out of my menu here. I can name this later on, so you can name your model. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm going to show you how to calibrate this ESC. So when you do a calibration, you need to make sure that, if you've got a new model, obviously everything should be defaulted to neutral and zeros and all that sort of thing. But if you are, recycling an old model that you had on your radio, or you're using an analog radio that, you've been toying around with the dials and everything, just make sure everything's back to its neutral position. You haven't got throttle joule rates turned down or anything like that, or throttle endpoints turned down. You want your endpoints and your joule rates, everything at 100% for your throttle, but your throttle trim should be at neutral, and that's pretty much it, right? So once you've got all of that, what we're going to be doing is holding this set button on the actual on-off switch. So hold that down as you turn on your ESC. The ESC will start to beep, which means that it's now in calibration mode, and then we'll go through 3 steps which will basically calibrate this ESC. So hold that down, turn it on. So that is ready to be calibrated. What we're going to do is we're going to hold our switch in our hand, and without actually touching the throttle on the radio, we're going to press it once. We're going to pull full throttle and press it whilst holding full throttle. So you'll have a double beep, and now you're going to go full reverse and then press it again, and you'll have 3 beeps, and now the throttle is calibrated. It's that simple. Now I've got full throttle on there, and I've got reverse on there as well. So all the other settings and everything else you can do after this goes into the car, but for now we're good to go. I can power this off and I can start, getting the car ready to accept all these electronics. Now, one of the things I like to do before I actually start installing any of my electronics is to actually dry fit my motor in ESC, work out if I'm actually going to be needing to modify anything, cut some wires, extend wires, all that type of thing. So given that I actually took this combo from another car, it's very important that I actually dry fit this first to see how it's all going to work. Now, if the motor can mount this way and the ESC can mount this way, the wires should be able to go over the tower-to-tower brace. If my motor needs to be twisted a little bit more, or it needs to come this way a bit more and the wires are going to be a bit of an issue, I may need to just undo one of the screws here on the tower-to-tower brace, lift it up a little bit, fit my motor through here, and allow the wires to go underneath, which will give me a little bit more slack. So we'll see how that goes. The on and off switch will of course mount on the on and off switch little bracket that they provide, and I've got plenty of cable here to be able to run this all the way to the receiver box up the front, so that shouldn't be an issue. So first order of business is going to be to remove this motor mount plate that you see here. This is actually going to mount to the front of the motor, so I've got to take these 2 screws here, take them off, slide this out and mount that to the motor. And then I'm also going to be taking off this cover. Now this cover is just so that I can see the gear mesh and actually fit the pinion correctly. There are 2 holes at the top here which allow you to reach 2 screws that are holding it in place. This is actually really easy to do. So you take those 2 screws out, and once you've got the screws out, the cover will come off quite easily, just like so. We'll pop that to the side for now, and I'll get another tool which I think might be a 3mm hex driver. And let's see, yes it is indeed. That will allow me to undo this screw, move that over to the side, and then I should be able to hopefully access the top screw as well. Oh, it's proving to be a bit tricky. I may need to remove this little pin here, which is kind of in the way. There is a little rubber O-ring just there, and with your fingernails you can roll it forward and very carefully try not to lose it, because if this guy springs out somewhere, you're gonna have a bad day. So you may need to get something to kind of grab that and pull it out, and then the pin will very easily come off. Okay, so I managed to get it out just by poking at it with my fingernails. Then we can push this pin out of the way. Now I can pull that back just like so, and now I have access to that top screw just there. So pretty easy to access all of this. And I'll take this guy out of here, and now we can slide this out, taking note of how it actually fits in there. But it shouldn't really matter, because really this only mounts onto the motor one way. So we want the motor to kind of sit sort of like that. So let's see, if I mount this way, how is that going to look? Am I going to be lining up to any screws? Oh, I've got 2 M4 screws actually. So I've got this one here, and this one here will actually match to the 2 bottom holes that you see here. So that one there and the one on the opposite side. So I'm going to see if that little pack has actually got some M4 screws in there for us. Hopefully we have what we need to be able to fit this up. Yes, it looks like there are a couple of M4 screws in here, so let's get this out. Let me see, I'll just move the car a little bit and I'll pop these down here so we don't lose them. So there are two M4, they look like 10mm screws, which are perfect for that motor mount. So I'm actually going to be using some Loctite. I'll put a couple of drops of Loctite on those holes for the motor. So you only need a couple of drops, one in there and one in there, and that should hold that perfectly. This Tamiya Loctite, by the way, is absolutely awesome. Highly recommend it. It's a bit like a paste, so it actually works really well. And now I can start putting these guys into place. So let me see over here, and the second one. This is a 3mm hex as well. So you'll need your 3mm hex driver for this. Crank that on, that's perfect. These are actually really nice tools, by the way. I like the handle. The handle's a plastic handle, but it's kind of chunky, so it allows you to really get a good grip on it and put in some torque, which is pretty good. So you'll notice the motor mount's got a little bit of a slot here as well. So this is to allow you to actually mount the grub screw on that motor shaft. And of course, when you're doing the pinion, always make sure you also install a little bit of Loctite on the grub screw and make sure you screw it onto the flat bit of that shaft. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to be dummy fitting. The pinion's not on, it's just kind of sliding on there. I'm just going to be dummy fitting this just to see where the pinion has to sit. So essentially, for the pinion to be kind of like in the middle of the spur gear, it's only about 1mm away from the face of this motor plate. So when I actually put my grub screw, I'm only going to be leaving a little bit of a gap there, and that should give me the perfect fitment for this pinion. So now I've got my pinion all fitted up. I can now fit this on the truck, and I can put those screws back on. Again, you may want to put a little bit of a drop of Loctite on these just so they don't back out. So just a little bit there should do the trick. Now I'm not tightening these on just yet. I'm actually backing them out, allowing me to slide this just a little bit. Now you can do this with the old paper trick if that's what you want to do. I kind of do it by feel these days. I kind of know when I'm hearing that tiny little jiggle of the spur gear. So what I'm doing there is I'm only touching the spur gear and I can hear that little click. So essentially you want to bring the pinion and spur as close as possible to each other, but without them actually touching. And you want to be able to have a nice free drivetrain. You don't want to be able, you don't want to hear any sort of bind or anything like that going on with your drivetrain. So that's the motor fitted. That's part one. Now we're going to move on to the speed controller, and I may need to remove my, hang on, how's this go? It goes this way. I may need to remove the battery tray because I think the speed controller can actually be screwed on to the base here. I was going to just double-sided tape it on, and I can do that. But since there are actually provisions here for screws to go into the back of the speed controller, why not do that? So I'm going to remove the battery tray. I'm actually going to be putting all of this back together at this end first. So I'm going to put that there like so. I'm going to grab that pin, slide him into place. Actually, before we do that, let's be a little bit smarter and put this back on. The other screw kind of disappeared into the abyss in the middle of the chassis, so I'll have to turn the truck upside down to try and find it, because when I took it off, it bounced off and it went in here somewhere. So now I can close that. I can feed this little guy through here, and I can get my little rubber O-ring, and we'll just slip him over the top like so. And that's it. Now that's not going anywhere, and that's staying in there nice and fixed. So I'm going to be removing this battery tray, which I don't think is actually that hard. I might get rid of that stand temporarily, and we'll move these screws and everything else over to the side here. And let's have a look. I think I need my 2.5mm hex driver. So we're going to take this one out, which I believe is the bottom of the battery tray. So that's this screw here. And then this one here as well. The other thing I like about these tools I've noticed as well, these hex drivers, is they have, you know, this shapely sort of handle, which means they're less susceptible to rolling off the bench. The amount of times I put a tool down and it just starts rolling off the bench, it's insane. But these, they kind of just stay there, which is something that I really like. So now that we've got that done, here we go, battery tray removed. So there's only 2 screws and the whole thing comes off. Now I can actually match those holes, which I think are the 2 middle holes. They actually match to the holes there for the speed controller. Now, they do give you some screws here, which I believe are exactly for that. So there are these little guys, whoops, where am I? There we go. There are these little guys, which will actually fit underneath there and hold that ESC in place. So again, I'm not going to need any Loctite on these because I'm screwing into plastic. That's my 2.5. I need my 2mm, which is the blue one. I got to remember the colors. It's a matter of just getting used to these colors now. So that is that. Let's have a look here. See if I can actually match up these holes. It looks like it does. So the holes aren't a perfect match to the ESC, so you may need a little bit of gentle persuasion with these. That works. Now this one over here, so I can put him on that side. So that goes in there, and there we go. That ESC isn't going anywhere, which is perfect. It's exactly what you want. So as I suspected, this is a little bit tight. This wire, unfortunately, it comes from the outside edge of the motor and going in here. It's just not enough slack. So I'm going to remove the battery tray and I'm going to lift this up and yeah, move the wires underneath. So I think that's the safest way to do this. Okay, so now that I've got that mounted underneath the tower-to-tower brace, I also mounted up my on and off switch while I was at it. I will say that you are going to need some double-sided tape behind this switch. If you don't put anything on the switch, it does jiggle a little bit around inside the actual holder. So I've put a little bit of double-sided tape and now it doesn't jiggle anymore. The tape isn't even stuck to the actual mount. It's stuck to the switch but not to the mount. So essentially that should be sorted out. Now the battery tray does need to come out regardless, whether you are intending to mount the ESC directly to the tray or you're using a different ESC, you're just going to be using double-sided tape. Because the wires actually route underneath this battery tray. So you can see here, there's actually little catches and things like that that you can put the cable running through here and tidy everything up right underneath the battery tray, and then it'll just kind of jump across and go directly to the receiver box. So essentially that's how this is going to work. So I'm going to hopefully, actually I might cross it over this way and then come across this way, and then hopefully it'll just go straight into the receiver box. There we go. So I've got that mounted up like so. There's a gap here in case you're wondering, so it's not going, the wire's not going to get pinched or anything like that. So now I can mount my battery tray back into position and have my wires routed underneath. So this is going to be a little tricky. I'm going to do some of this off camera while I sort of wrestle with the wires and everything else. These wires are a bit of a pain being underneath here, to be honest with you. They're putting a lot of pressure on this, so it's making things a little bit tricky. Now the ESC cable that you see here, this kind of, there's not much of it left. It's only a little bit left that we've got. That's actually going to slide underneath the chassis brace that you see there. It's going to go underneath that and then up into the receiver box. So I'll show you how all that works in a sec, but for now let me just open this up and get everything ready for my receiver and servo. So now that I got the receiver cover off, you can actually see how it all sort of works. The servo goes in there and your receiver kind of sits in here. Now from what I can gather, the best way to do this is actually take the receiver box off entirely, and that involves taking off 4 screws underneath, which are these 4 here. So let's quickly get those out of the way and see if we can actually feed the wires through underneath the actual receiver box. Okay, so it looks like there's two more screws holding this receiver box in place. There's that guy there and this one over here. So we're going to need to take those off as well. So I'll get my 2.5mm bit and hopefully, here we go, I can take them off quite easily. So as I remove this, you can actually see how the wires are actually meant to feed in. So it would have been almost impossible for me to do this in the car because the wires need to come in, if you can imagine, they come in from behind and they need to pop in from in here and then go up through here into the actual receiver box. So this will make it a little bit tricky, but once this is out of the car, it should be a lot easier. Now I've dummy fitted this into place so the receiver box isn't actually screwed in, but you can see how I've routed the wires coming in from underneath the receiver box. The ESC wire runs underneath the actual aluminium chassis brace just there. It can be a little bit tricky to see, but once you run it along the ground, it's actually well out of the way of the drive shaft, so it shouldn't give you any grief at all. Now there is one thing that you do need to be careful of, and that is make sure that when you're screwing the receiver box back into place, the wires are not between the receiver box and the chassis. There is plenty of gaps for the wires to run so that they don't get pinched, but if you are not careful, you can actually, you know, pin the wires and damage the wire potentially between the receiver box and the actual chassis. So make sure you route your wires carefully and they're out of harm's way, so when you're putting your screws in to put the receiver box back in place, you're not actually going to be damaging those wires. So I'll put everything back into place now. I'll screw this back in and we'll come back and mount the receiver, and I'll show you how to put the servo horn on here correctly, and then we'll be pretty much done. So now that we've got that done, I'm ready to plug my receiver in, and remembering that the servo goes into channel 1, so that goes into that guy right there. Hopefully I can get this from this angle. Here we go. Yep, plugging that in all the way. And my ESC into channel 2. So 1 to turn, 2 to burn. And I've already got some double-sided tape on here as well to stick that down. I'm going to see which way this is actually going to fit best, and it looks like just like that would work perfect. So I can peel off the back of this. There we go. And stick him down in there like so. So now that we got that in place, I can now put my servo horn on here. But before we do that, I do like to power up the car just to make sure that the servo is actually neutralized, and I'm going to be able to mount the servo horn with my wheels as straight as possible. So since we've already bound this receiver to the radio, we can simply just power on, and we know that the car isn't going to be running away on us or anything. We are going to need to check motor direction in a little while, so we'll do that soon. But for now, I just want to make sure that my steering servo is neutralized, and I'm now going to be able to straighten my wheels as best as I can and mount this servo so that I have the least amount of trimming to do necessary on here. So let me see if I can get this guy mounted up here. Okay, so it looks like I've got that guy into place now. My wheels are relatively straight, and that spare screw that we had earlier that was a little bit longer than the others for the ESC is actually for this servo horn. And I'm going to put just a dab of Loctite on there as well to make sure that this guy doesn't run away on us. And boom. Now make sure when you're tightening that you hold that servo horn so you're not straining the servo. And wow, these tools really lock into some of these screws, I tell you. Now we've got that all sorted out. Look at that. That's plenty of power on this guy now. Right is right, left is left. We'll do a couple more checks before we finalize all of this. I'm going to put the car up on the stand, and just very quickly I'm going to check motor direction. It's actually going the right way, so that's perfect. Very nice and smooth. Reverse is reverse, forward is forward, right is right, and left is left. So My goodness, this servo is insane. Now, one of the things that I like to do as well before I actually take the car out is of course adjust my endpoints. Now, if you have a radio that doesn't have endpoints, you can adjust the dual rates to make sure that you're not straining your servo. And the way that I'm going to be doing this just very quickly is I'm going to go into my menu here and I'm going to go down to endpoint just there. I'm going to click on that and I'm actually going to click on what do we do here? Yeah, negative. So go negative. I'm going to go down to left, basically down to like 50% or less. And I'm going to turn the car to the left. You can see that I've got very little steering to the left. And now I'm going to slowly turn this up until I see the wheels stop turning. Whoops, hang on. It's not what we want. Where do we go? There. So that's going to go up. There we go, that's it there. So about 80% is roughly where my endpoints are on the left. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the right. So I'm going to reduce everything down. I'm going to turn to the right and I'm going to slowly increase that number. Well, that looks about it. So it looks like about 55 to the right and 80 to the left. So that is full steering for this car, and that's pretty much done. Okay, and just like that, we are done with this guy. Now I'll show you very quickly how everything has turned out, which actually looks fantastic. So I've put my receiver cover back on there. I've got my motor ready to go there. I've got the ESC mounted up. Now there is one thing with the ESC mount as well. There's one additional screw that I put here. It's about an 8mm countersunk screw. I don't know why Timcorelli don't provide a screw for that, because otherwise the plate that the ESC sits in can actually move around a little bit. Even though I've bolted the ESC down to the battery tray, there's nothing securing the end bit just here, and it kind of flaps around a little bit. So I put a screw in there. I did the same thing in last year's XDR as well. So I think they should include that little screw. It's only one screw, but thankfully I've got spares and I've managed to fit that up. So that pretty much wraps everything up. Now I'll do a quick recap here very quickly, just so that for those of you who perhaps missed something during this entire install, make sure you kind of plug everything in before you start installing your electrics. You know, bind up all your receivers, calibrate your ESCs, all that sort of thing. Make sure your servo is working, your motor's working, all that thing's good, so that when you put it into the car, you know that everything's working 100%. Then of course, dry fit everything, work out how your wiring is going to sit, where your ESC, which way it's going to face, where your cables are going to go, all that type of thing. And then of course start making that install. I started with the motor, fitted up the pinion, did all of that, which worked out really well. Then I mounted up my ESC, connected up my switch, and then of course I routed the wires underneath the battery tray, swinging it around to this side, where they came up underneath the aluminium chassis brace up into the receiver box. The servo was mounted up, and of course I did remove the receiver box as you saw, and plugged everything into the receiver, made sure that everything was working okay, and of course mounted up the servo horn on the servo whilst I had the car powered up, so that I would make sure that, you know, the servo wasn't out of alignment or anything, and I could keep the wheels as straight as possible when doing that. As far as motor rotation goes, thankfully it was actually going the right way. Of course, depending on the car that you're doing and you know, what type of system you've got, the motor may actually be spinning the opposite way. Now with a sensorless setup, you can just swap a couple of wires and the motor will change rotation. However, because mine is soldered onto the ESC, had I needed to change rotation of my motor, I would have had to plug a program card in there and switch the rotation of the motor. So that's one way of doing it, aside from obviously desoldering and resoldering those cables around, because this is a sensorless setup as well, even though that is a censored ESC. So everything is connected up very, very nicely, and I cannot wait to run this car. Now, as far as the toolkit itself goes, As you can see, there's actually quite a number of things on here. If you guys want me to do a more elaborate video on this toolkit, please leave a comment in the comment section down below. But I will be kind of showing this in future videos. This is going to be the toolkit that I'll be using from now on a lot of my cars. As you can see, we've got all our necessary tools here from 1.5 mil all the way to 3 mil. We've got our socket keys as well, our little socket wrenches there. So we've got a 5.5 and we have a 7 mil, which is great for wheel nuts and things like that. There's a cross wrench, there's a 5mm Allen key, there's a turnbuckle key in here as well. We've got a little pinion tray. We've also got a tray to put all your nuts and bolts as you're working on your RCs, and to be honest, I probably should have been using that a little bit more when I was taking all the screws off and everything to keep everything tidied up. This tool's really cool. It kind of looks like a pair of pliers, but it really isn't. It's got a measuring tool here, so you can check the size of your screws, the diameter of the screw there as well. You can grip your shocks and so forth, shock bodies through here. Shock shafts can be gripped through here. This can also be used as a camber gauge for your wheels. You can pop out your little ball ends on with this tool, and there you can actually, and pop them back in, of course. These will actually allow you to put turnbuckles or shock rod ends in there and be able to turn them on and all that sort of thing. So really multi-purpose, MacGyver type of or even like a Swiss Army knife for RC. Really cool to see that. 17mm hex, which also plugs into this for your shock holders, and you can also plug these two things on here to the top of this to use for other purposes. As I said, I can probably go into a little bit more detail with this, but everything works really well. These the tools that I used work quite well. I'm actually pretty impressed with this toolkit, and again, I want to give a big shout out to Team Corelli for sending out the toolkit as well as the car for review. It's now set up and ready for a bash. I cannot wait to show it to you, and I'm hoping that I can have a lot of fun with this guy, just as I did with the one from last year. And of course, this one being a little bit more beefed up, I'm sure can take a lot more punishment than the one that I had previously, which I still have. So I'm going to leave this video here. If you found this useful at all and got something out of it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button before you go. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you're new, and as always, check out the video description down below. There'll be links in there to my socials, links in there to Team Corelli as well, and of course any other links that I can think of regarding this guy, including motors, ESCs and all the rest of it. So that is it from me. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll speak to you all next time.